To our third genre storytelling event. We've had personal stories, then we went to folk tales, and now we're doing spooky, scary stories. And next month, we won't have an event because the Storytelling Association of California is putting on Telebration. And please go to the website and check it out. There's a lot of events. There's some really great ones that are paired events with Northern and Southern California storytelling groups, swap groups that have got together and are planning a joint telling. So you can look on the website for all the different times, and because they're all at different days and times. So we hope that you check that out and hear these interesting storytellers from all these different swap groups around California, like you're going to hear tonight. So tonight we have spooky, scary stories, and we have 6 amazing storytellers from different swap groups around California, and they will be sharing a story that relates to that topic in some fashion or the other. So please sit back and enjoy our first teller, Ron Chick. He is representing the Inland Valley Storytellers Group, but he's also a member of about 3 other groups that I know of. And he has been telling since 1973. He's been involved with children, doing children's storytelling. He and I have met many times at the Ojai Storytelling Festival. So I think Ron and I are both storytelling groupies. He goes around to all the different festivals that we had, the Bay Area Festival, the Ojai Festival, Timpanogos he just talked about. Ron, have you ever been to Jonesboro?
I've been to Jonesboro twice.
Okay.
I would like to go every year, but that would only happen if I won the lottery.
Right.
I have been to literally all of the Timpanogos festivals since the year I retired. I've been to 13 straight now.
Very nice.
So,
My goodness.
Now, Ron and I have had the opportunity to take a couple great workshops together at the Ojai Storytelling Festival. One was with Donald Davis about, I don't know, 8 years ago, 6 years ago. And a couple of years ago was a really fantastic workshop with Claire Murphy. So
yeah, I love Claire.
Oh, yes. Okay, so Ron, please take it away and let's hear your story.
Hi there. I'm Ron Chick at Chain Unbroken Stories, and this is one of the original stories I told when I started out, and my grandmother is in it, but only as a sleeping child. The year is 1908 on a small farm on the Kansas plains. You got to realize in 1908, life was very different. If you were rich enough, you might have a saddle horse, but most people either only had plow horses, so they didn't get around much. And it happened that that particular October, there was going to be a dance in a town not far away, and the parents decided to leave the farm in charge with grandmother in charge and go to that all-night event and not be back until mid-morning the next day. So that's where our story opens up. The children had already been sent upstairs, having had their Halloween treat, and grandmother sat rocking and knitting and listening to the low Kansas wind blow across the prairie. When suddenly there was a knock at the door, and a voice called out, "Open!" And grandmother, thinking it might be a late night caller, hurried to the door and lifted the latch and swung it open. But it wasn't a neighbor or anyone she'd ever seen before. It was an old woman, all dressed in black and not very pretty looking. She looked at grandmother and said, "I am the witch of one horn." And sure enough, sticking straight up from the top of her head was a long, curly, white horn. Grandmother tried to speak, but her voice wouldn't work, and the old woman pushed away past her and went over and sat down by the fire. So grandmother sat back down in her rocking chair, not knowing what to do. Came the knock and the voice saying, "Open." And grandmother, thinking it might be someone who could help her, hurried to the door and lifted the latch and swung it open, but it wasn't anyone who could help her. It was another old woman all dressed in black and very pale and really not very pretty. I am the Witch of Two Horns, she said. Hey, I see the others have begun to arrive. And with that outrageous statement, she went across and joined the other witch by the fire. Came the knock and the voice again. Open. Now look, grandmother didn't want to open that door. She already had two ugly old women calling themselves witches in her house on a Hollywood night, but her legs picked her up out of her rocking chair and dragged her over to the door, and her arm lifted up the latch and swung it open, and there indeed was a third old woman, all dressed in black. I am the Witch of Three Horns, she said, and pushed away past grandmother and went across the living room. But grandmother noticed that even though her legs were moving like she was walking, the soles of her black boots never quite touched the floor. 4 witches, 5 witches, 6 witches, each one a little older than the one before. 7 witches, 8 witches, each one a little uglier than the one before. 9 witches, 10 witches, 11 witches, each witch with one more horn, all came into the house that exact same way. And just after the door had closed from the 11th witch, the whole house shimmered and shook, and the dancing fire, seemed to die down. And a voice came out of the night saying, open. And the door burst open like it had been hit with a battering ram, and in floated the most atrocious, horrid, ugly old crone you have ever imagined in all your life. Her nose was as long as my thumb and crooked and covered with warts. Her chin was so long and bony sharp that if she nodded her head, she'd have poked a hole in her chest. Her skin was so pale and wrinkled, the grandmother thought it was the skin of someone long dead. And her eyes weren't the eyes of a human being at all, for they were fiery red and glowed with an evil light. I am the Witch of 12 Horns, she said. And sure enough, around her head, like a crown of many points, were 12 long, scaly, sharp, multicolored, black, white horns. Blinked her fiery red eyes and vanished. And the door closed. And when grandmother looked over, there she was with the other witches. But now all the witches were working. From somewhere, though none of them had carried a thing through the door, they'd come up with 3 enormous bags of wool and carding brushes. And we're getting to card the wool, which is the first step in making thread. And from somewhere, though it couldn't have fit in their pockets, they come up with a spinning wheel, and we're spinning longer strands. And from somewhere, though it took up half the wall and wouldn't have come through the door, they'd come up with an enormous wooden loom, and it began to weave a cloth. And a strange thing was happening. Each time the bar of the loom came down on that ugly gray wool string, it turned into soft golden silk. Grandmother watched the witches at their work for a little while, and then the witch of 12 Horns looked at her and said, my dear, why don't you bake us a cake? Now, grandmother didn't want to bake a cake, but still her legs picked her up and dragged her out into the kitchen. And there she got out the flour and the eggs and the sugar, but the pump wouldn't work, and the bucket was missing, and there was no water in the kitchen, and she didn't know what to do. And the witch of 12 Horns called out, come here, my dear. When she stepped back out into the living room, there was the witch holding up the bucket. But now the bucket had hundreds of holes in it. That's some water in this. Grandmother panicked. She grabbed the bucket. She ran out the front door. She went down the hill. She scooped up the water from the stream and started up the hill, and all the water poured So she went back down by the stream bed. She scooped it up again. She pulled it up. She scooped it, ran up the hill, and all the water poured out. And suddenly, grandmother was so frightened she couldn't even move. At that moment, the low Kansas wind seemed to blow right down around her ears. Quickly, 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 fill the bottom of the bucket with moss and stones. It will hold the water. And thinking that a good idea, she knelt by the stream bed, scooped mud and strings in it, pulled up some water, and began to walk up the hill. And the wind blew down around her ears, saying, quickly, 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 call out to the mountain, the fairy people is on fire. And not understanding why, but being afraid not to obey, she set the bucket down by the door. She clapped her hands and she called in, the mountain of the fairy people is on fire, it's on fire. And out flew witches. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 witches blew like a single puff of gray smoke. And last of all came the witch of 12 horns with her fire red eyes. She looked at grandmother and said, we'll be back, and vanished. Grandmother picked up the bucket and began to walk through the door, and the wind blew down around her ears, saying, quickly, 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 for the witches can return. Wash the feet of your sleeping grandchildren and cast the water across the door. So she hurried up to the loft and she washed the feet of her sleeping grandchildren, came back down, cast the feet water onto the door, slammed the door, pulled the string in, and put a bar across it. And the wind blew around the chinks and cracks, and saying, quickly, 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 for the witches can return. Take the cloth and put it half in and half out of a drawer. And not understanding why, but being afraid not to obey, she reached over to the loom, she pulled out the cloth, she put it half in and half out of a drawer, and sat trembling. And the witches blew around one more time. Hey, quickly, 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 for the witches can return. Hey, take the cake and break it and put each piece in the mouth of the sleeping child. Now this grandmother didn't understand at all, for she had made no cake. But when she stepped out into the kitchen, there on the countertop was a small blood red cake that the witches had made somehow in her absence. And she took the cake upstairs and began to break off pieces of cake and put pieces of cake in the mouths of each of the children. And just as the last piece of cake went into the mouth of the youngest child, the witches came back. They flew around and around and around the house, laughing and cackling. And the witch of 12 horns called out, open witch's door. And the door began to shimmer and shake as if some mighty hand had hold of it. But at last it fell still. And with a voice like a rusty old hinge said, I can't. I've been cast with feet water. My spell is broken. I can't. And fell silent. And the witches flew around and around the house some more, no longer laughing. The witch of 12 horns called out, open witch's cloth. And the cloth that was hanging half out of the drawer began to shake and pull up and around and about as if a hurricane had entered the house. But after a while, it fell limp. And a soft, silky voice said, I can't. I'm half in and half out of a drawer. I can't obey your summons. I can't. And fell silent. And with a voice that rose like thunder in a stormy night, the horrible witch called out, open witch's cake. Of course, a cake that is broken and in the mouths of sleeping children cannot answer at all. And at that moment, there was a mighty laughter in the night sky. And the witches realized that the spirit of the wind that loves all good and kind folk had tricked them and broken their spells for that night. Now, about this time in the story, I or one of my brothers would say, oh, Grandma, you're just making all this up. And she pulled out of her sewing basket a beautiful silk cloth that was only finished on 3 sides. And she would tell us that that was the cloth the witches had made when she was asleep as a small child. That in all these years, the witches have never come back. However, if ever you're alone on a Halloween night, should a wind be blowing outside the door and a knock come and a voice that doesn't sound quite human call out to open, don't do it! They are undoubtedly after you.
Hey, I love the rocking chair effect. I felt like I was on the porch, listening to a ghost story. And everyone, you can comment in the chat section if you have any comments for any of the tellers or anything interesting that you want to let us know about. And for the tellers, if you want people to contact you, you can put your email contact information in the chat box. All right. Thank you so much, Ron. Outstanding start to our program. So our next teller is Jean Ellison, and she is representing
Mixed bag.
the mixed bag of Belmont, right? They call that.
Uh-huh.
And Jean has been telling stories for a long time. She tells for children, for adults, at museums, at schools. And she's also participated with Stage Bridge, with many of you know, with Senior Stories. Like me, she is a graduate of the Certificate in Storytelling program from Dominican College that was in the 90s. And with the most amazing teachers and storytellers like Gay Ducey, and it was just a fantastic program. And I guarantee you, if Jean has gone through that program, she has learned many things, which I'm sure she'll be sharing with us. She said she has a passion for helping people find their voice through storytelling. So please welcome Jean Ellison.
Thank you, Ed. Thank you, Sack. I'm very happy to be here on this dark and not stormy night with a story from the Iroquois. In the long ago days, evil monsters and spirits ruled the night skies. As long as the sun was shining, they hid in their caves and their dens. But on those dark, stormy nights, they came out and wreaked havoc. They floated through the air. They hunted people, their favorite food. The most horrible of all was the great flying head. Although it was just a head with no body, it was 4 times taller than the tallest man. It had this round head, and from its cheeks grew these enormous wings that enabled it to soar like a buzzard and dive on its prey. And all things were prey to this monster, even humans. Now, this was a dark, stormy night, and some of the people in the village noticed that flying head flying above the treetops and set out the warning. And everyone scattered to their hiding places and held their breaths in fear of this horrible creature. It didn't have teeth. It had razor sharp fangs. Its face was matted with greasy, awful hair that no weapon could penetrate. I'm telling you, this thing was so scary. Now, everyone went and hid as they had in the past, but one woman and her baby stayed behind in the longhouse. And she said to herself, well, somebody's got to stand up to this monster. It might as well be me. And so she built a large fire, a huge fire, and in it she cooked big round stones until they were glowing hot. Now the smoke curling out of the roof of the longhouse attracted the attention of the great flying head. And it swooped down, and its head came into the doorway, and it looked at that lady. She pretended not to notice, though she knew full well that it was at the door. the coal, the rocks were hot and glowing red. And she took a forked stick and she picked up one of those stones in the forked stick and she pretended to eat it. But tossing the stone behind her. And then, that was so good. I haven't had such tender, delicious meat. She reached in for another stone and the same thing. She opened her mouth and pretended to eat it, but dropped it behind her back. The flying head couldn't help itself. It swooped into the longhouse and pounced on that fire pit with all those glowing rocks and gulped them all down in one big gulp. And then it screamed, a scream that I'm surprised we didn't hear it in the lower states. It was so loud. And he flew from the longhouse and he flew over the trees and his screaming could be heard for miles. The earth trembled with the screams. And then they got fainter and fainter and fainter until, was it really gone? Could they really safely come out of their hiding places? And they did. They came out of their hiding places. And you know what? That horrible thing, that great flying head, was never seen again. At least, not that anybody knows. Thank you.
Love the sound effect. Oh boy, you're so expressive. Thank you so much. Okay, so our next teller is, let me look at my list here. Is from the Hayward Storytellers. His name is Lance McVeigh. And Lance has been a high school teacher for 25 years. He lived up in he was born in the Santa Cruz Mountains, so I'm sure he has many interesting ghost stories from those mountains up there. He said he went on a camping trip, and I don't know if it was with children or was it with children, and he was asked to tell a story, a ghost story, and he realized he didn't have one. So he went, okay, this isn't going to happen again. So he became a student of ghost stories and made sure he always had one. And he said he has a lot of ghost stories from old times. And so I'm not sure what we're going to hear tonight, but I'm looking forward to it. Please welcome Lance McVeigh.
Thank you, Ed. So yeah, what I decided to do after that fateful camping trip was write my own stories that sounded like they were from a long time ago and then memorize them so I could pretend like I knew all these old fancy ghost stories from long ago. So I wrote them in verse because I had been charmed by Robert Service's Cremation of Sam McGee and Edgar Allan Poe and things like that, as I'm sure many of you have as well. So I went back to college that year after that camping trip and I wrote this story particularly for those kids wishing this is what I'd told around that campfire. So you have to imagine that's where we are, Big Basin, Redwood State Park, campfire. Somebody tell us a ghost story. Shall I tell you a tale of horror and dread? Shall I tell you of spirits that rise from the dead? For few will believe, but all of them feel a chill in the breeze when ghosts become real. And now is the time when ghosts like to listen. They gaze in the fire and they see their eyes glisten. They're here all around us. They know we're afraid. They know these are stories and not a charade, for the dead do arise when disturbed from the grave. They wander the world, ne'er to behave. They fly through the fog and blend with the mist of evil and hatred their souls do consist. They play no favorites, they kill no concern. They search through the shadows, it's fear that they yearn. So here we all sit, and some are afraid. Deep in your soul, your pride is betrayed. So all of the spirits will speed to our hollow, the chills down your spine, the others will follow. The darkness will grow, the evil will spread, the ghosts and the goblins will fill you with dread. But ghosts are quite curious, and they like ghosts are quite curious, and they like a good story, I'm pleased to report. So as long as I continue my verses of rhyme, our lives are quite safe. Well, at least for a time. In addition to this, their egos are large. They love to hear lore, so I'll still be in charge as long as I tell you of the power of fright, and each of you quiver in the chill of the night, as I tell you a tale of treasure and treason, as we sink in the shadows to the end of all reason. It begins on a ship as it sails the sea. Its name is Remora, a barkentine bee. The ocean is rough in a thunderous storm. The Remora is lost, lest a hero be born. Deep in the hull there be peace found in prayer, as the cries of the crew bring forth but despair. A small group of peasants who have gathered their wealth huddle and pray for their safety and health. Between them, their savings can start a new life. In charge of their gold are a husband and wife. Their child was born just a day in advance, a bundle of joy their lives to enhance. The man's name is Jacob, a smithy he be. The people he leads count 103. They follow his power, his strength and concern. He is a man whose wisdom they learn. But now he is praying. Their trust he's betraying, for the Remora is dying with the lives it's containing. Above on this deck, the air is less still with the water and waves and the crew they will kill. The captain is calm as he stands at the helm, a crew in his palm, a king in his realm. His eyes are like coal, his heart is of stone. He sees in his dreams that he'll soon be alone. Ne'er does he speak, but all will obey. His words are the law, and none will betray. A sword at his side, a patch on one eye. No one will question it, but all wonder why. He suddenly speaks and all becomes still. He motions the crew to follow his will. The lifeboats are lowered and the peasants informed. The Remora is dying in the strength of the storm. Well, the people are weak, but Jacob is strong and he senses their fear if the captain is wrong. In the boats, they will die. They know it is true, but the ship will but last only a moment or two. But the captain will lead them. They escape to the boats. Jacob can see the first three are afloat. The last is for he and his baby and wife. He prays to the heavens to spare them a life. He looks to the captain and stares in his eye. Deep in the fog, he hears the first cries. No fear in the captain, though death at his door. Jacob climbs to the boat to see him no more. For the captain has chosen a small crew of 5 to remain with Remora to keep her alive. If she is to die, he'll follow her down. He'll stay at the helm and surely will drown. Well, Jacob sees Remora fade away in the mist, along with the gold, the captain insists, for the weight of their gold would cost them their lives. Deep in the distance, he hears the crew's cries. 5 loyal men fade away with their ship as the thunder will rumble like the crack of a whip. But Jacob is puzzled as he watches it fade. The ship seemed so sturdy the way it was made. The captain was calm and the 5 not in fright. Something was missing and all was not right. How stupid, he thought, to think of it after. What he heard were not cries, but the cackle of laughter. The captain was clever and Jacob a fool. His want was the gold and the storm was his tool. Jacob believed, but betrayed to his death, shed a tear for his child and wife, Elibeth. Jacob looked on as the ocean was fed, and already 1/3 of his people were dead, some of them children and some of them old, but all of them soon their deaths he behold. A wave took another, only his boat remained. his wife and their child it also contained. All were sent, many were crying and all were afloat, trying to climb in the bow of his boat. But Jacob knew well, it too would be lost. And then it was over, in a wave it was tossed. All were sent crying and all were sent flying and many were dead. But Jacob is strong, the people had said. So he called to his friends to hold to him tight. And with 8 on his arms, he swam in the night. His body was, the water was ice and his muscles were torn. The people held tight and his flesh, it was torn. He prayed to the Lord to forgive his mistake and then asked for revenge on the captain to take. Then he looked to his baby and held Elabeth and shed a small tear as he sank to his death. When the storm finally broke, the remora was well, though Jacob had prayed that he'd see her in hell. The crew was below as they laughed with the gold and talked of the peasants who had died in the cold. But they wondered how much the captain would keep, so they plotted to kill him that night while asleep. They crept to his cabin and jumped to his bunk, but all that they found was an old empty trunk. Where could he be, they thought and they feared, with that patch on one eye and that black satin beard. But as they sat and they pondered the mysterious joke, the cabin was filled with a cloud of white smoke. For the captain set fire to Remora that night. With the gold in a boat, he faded from sight. As he rode through the waves, their flesh he could smell, as the small crew of 5 were burning in hell. The remora was lost as the sky turned to black, and a chuckle was heard from old Captain Jack. How clever, he thought, ne'er a voice to be heard. How easy it is when the law is your word. His eye was like coal, his heart was of stone, his sword at his side, he sailed alone. But soon the wind was upon him, and the waves were to grow. He thought of the bodies he buried below. Waves began breaking on the stern of the boat, and he feared with another it would not stay afloat, but he was alone and rather quite light, and for this he was thankful, and all was all right. Another wave crashed, and another again. The captain was calm as the water rushed in. He thought he heard sounds like a moan in the waves. He thought of the others in their watery graves, but then in the shadows, a ghost he beheld. It was Jacob he saw, though his body was swelled. Alive, he was strong and heavy with might. Now dead, he was bloated, an unearthly sight. His body was heavy with salt in the sea. His skin was a pale gray color of green. His clothes were all tattered and covered with weed. The captain was frightened and couldn't believe. Well, the body was washed into the arms of old Jack. The weight of the body now knocked him aback. The boat began sinking and water came in. The captain was trapped under Jacob and pinned. The weight was too much for the waterlogged boat. With the gold in the body, it would not stay afloat. So he grasped for the gold that was now, the body too heavy, it lie on its back. He grasped for the gold that was now in a sack. He tied it to a rope and a float to it bound. Saving the gold, he was not fearing to drown. So he tossed out the gold and gasped for a breath as the boat and the body sank to their death. Well, this he expected, but what he did not was the justice of Jacob, the revenge he had sought. For the captain went down with a curious cry, ne'er to believe the reason and why. For Jacob had clung, with the death of his grip, to the sword of the captain that hung at his hip. So now I am finished. There's no more story to tell. The captain is dead and his soul is in hell. But the gold is still out there, afloat on a wave. But Jacob is waiting in his watery grave. For those who have hearts that are heavy as stone, to the depths he will drag you, to die there alone. So this is the end, my foolhardy friends. The spirits will moan when my poetry ends. So look to the shadows, their eyes you will see. And like the old captain, you too will believe.
Oh,
Yeah,
very good.
we believe. Fantastic. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yeah, I grew up in the San Juan Islands in Washington State, And my uncle was a salmon fisherman, and I have heard many sea stories, sea chanties, and songs. I've never heard that. So thank you very much for sharing that with me.
That's because I wrote that one.
Oh, oh, that's right. Fantastic. And your skull there is perfect there down in the corner. Love it. All right. Well, our next storyteller represents the Contra Costa tail spinners that have been around for a long time. Just as Linda has been around for a long time as a really great storyteller. Um, she has been telling stories for over 30 years. She was a naturalist with the East Bay Parks storytelling or East Bay Parks, and I'm sure that kind of led us into being able to have the Bay Area Storytelling Festival there. I'm sure that she was the one who got us in there, and she worked with that for over 30 years. And unfortunately, that was one of my favorite festivals that had to eventually come to an end, but that's the way it is. She has retired from that work. She's right now she's with the Storytelling Corps at the Asian Art Museum of San Francisco, and she tells many events. And she was for SAC our regional gem winner of this year. So we really appreciate all the work she's done in the storytelling community, and we're all looking so forward to hearing your spooky story. Linda Yamoda.
Thank you, Ed.
You're welcome.
The story that I want to share with you tonight, I learned from Hiroko Fujita. Now, many of you know that Fujita-san is a wonderful storyteller in Japan, now in her 80s. And it's with her permission that I can tell you my version of her story called Clothes Bleached in the Moonlight. Now, here we like to begin our folk tales and fairy tales with long, long ago or once upon a time. But in Japan, this is how they traditionally start their stories. Mukashi mukashi, haru tokoro ni. Long, long ago in Japan, there was a young woman of marrying age. Now, because her father was the highest official in their village, her marriage was very carefully arranged. And at the beginning, she was happy with her marriage. She liked her husband. He seemed to be a good person. He was kind to her parents and to his parents. But after a period of time, it became clear to her that he was demanding and unappreciative and so critical. He didn't like the food she prepared or how she prepared it. He didn't like how she took care of the house or tended the garden. He didn't like how she wore her hair or how she spoke. It seemed that nothing she did could please him. And as for her, she found him to be so annoying. She couldn't stand the way he dragged his zori as he walked, ska, 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 or how he slurped his tea or chewed his food. But when she complained to her parents, all they would say is, "Shigatagarai." There is nothing to be done. For her marriage had been very carefully arranged. Well, she thought long and hard. She was so miserably unhappy. She didn't want to live with Shigataganai. There had to be something she could do. And so she decided she would have to go find Basama, the old woman of the mountain. Basama lived over a mountain, over a mountain, over a mountain. It was a long, arduous journey. When the young woman found Basama's hut, she stood in the open doorway with her head bowed. Basama was sitting at her loom. Ch, ch, sh, ch, ch, sh, ch, ch. Finally, the young woman got up enough nerve to say, "Sumimasen, excuse me." Ch, ch, sh. Honki desu ka? Are you sure? Hi, hi. Yes, I am sure. Very well. Walk to the west. Walk until you find the tree covered in silkworm caterpillars and wait. The caterpillars will spin their cocoons. And then, on the night of a beautiful full moon, collect as many of those cocoons as you can and return home. And wait. On the night of a beautiful full moon, boil the cocoons and reel off the silk and wait. On the night of a beautiful full moon, spin the silk into thread and wait. On the night of a beautiful full moon, weave the thread into cloth and wait. On the night of a beautiful full moon, bleach the cloth in the moonlight. And then, on the night of a beautiful full moon, sew the cloth into a kimono for your husband, but tell no one of this kimono. And then, on the night of a beautiful full moon, present the kimono to your husband and help him dress. Ch, 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 ch. Domo, domo arigato. Thank you very much. And so the young woman backed out of the doorway and immediately walked to the west, looking for that tree covered in silkworm caterpillars. She found the tree, and so she waited until the caterpillars spun their cocoons. And then, on the night of a beautiful full moon, she collected as many of those cocoons as she could, and she returned home, back over the mountain, over the mountain, over the mountain. She counted the days until the night of a beautiful full moon, and she boiled the cocoons and she reeled off the silk. And then she counted again until the night of a beautiful full moon, she spun the silk into thread. And then, on the night of a beautiful full moon, she wove the thread into cloth. And then, on the night of a beautiful full moon, she bleached the cloth in the moonlight. And then, on the night of a beautiful full moon, she sewed the cloth into a kimono for her husband. And then, on the night of a beautiful full moon, she presented the kimono to her husband. He was thrilled. She had never done anything like that for him before. He didn't even mind that it was white, like a burial kimono. He didn't seem to notice that as she helped him dress, She lapped the sides, not right and then left, as a living person wears their kimono, but left and then right, as you would dress a dead body. She wrapped a wide obi belt around him, and as she tied it, his eyes glazed over. He glided to the front door, slid it open, and went out into the moonlight. Oh, at first the young wife was excited. She was nervous. She felt, oh, free, free, free. But after a number of days, she began to feel uneasy. What happened to my husband? Where did he go? Is he coming back? And so she decided she would have to return to Basama, over the mountain, over the mountain, over the mountain. Again, she stood in the open doorway. Hontoni shiritai desu ka? Do you really want to know? Hi, yes, I do. Very well. Return home, and on the night of a beautiful full moon, go to the 6-way crossroad outside your village and wait. Domo arigato. So the young woman backed out of the door and rushed back home, over the mountain, over the mountain, over the mountain. She counted the days until she knew it would be a full moon. And she went to the 6-way crossroad outside their village. As she got there, the sun was setting. The full moon was rising above the mountains. She looked down the 6-way crossroad. Her heart was beating so fast. Doki doki, doki doki, doki doki. She thought she could see the figure of someone in a white kimono, but he was gliding, not walking. And as the figure got closer, she could hear he was chanting something. By unwittingly wearing clothes bleached in the moonlight, I am now a servant of the god of night. By unwittingly wearing clothes bleached in the moonlight, I am now a servant of the god of night. By unwittingly wearing clothes. That is my husband. But he can no longer see me. He is crossed over into the netherworld. Oh, Tosan, husband, gomen nasai. I am so sorry. Forgive me. Shigataganai. There's nothing to be done. Oshimai, that is all.
Thank you for taking us on that amazing journey. I totally enjoyed it. for everyone else that you are so expressive, and I just love the way that you look at the ghosts and the people that you are addressing in the story.
Yeah, very good.
All right, so our next storyteller is Carolyn Middleton, and she is representing the community storytellers. I'm sure she's going to tell us about this at the very end, but I don't know if I'm saying it right, but she is known as Miss Fruity. Is that correct?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is.
And can you tell us what that relates to?
That's Miss Fruity is who the storyteller is. Carolyn is my name.
Oh,
When I'm telling the story, the storyteller takes over, and that's not Carolyn.
and that's Miss Fruity. Okay, excellent. Well, she began telling stories in the 90s in the Seattle area, and that's the area that I'm from, Washington State, and there were lots of great storytelling things happening there. And she said that one of her mentors, Dr. Spencer Shaw, who's a well-known African-American teller, heard her tell stories and just said that she had an obligation to tell stories, that her voice
Nice.
had the healing virtue of water. She's now she's told worldwide, and most of her stories are African-American folk tales. But she said recently now she's got into personal stories, and I imagine with all the extra time many of us have, we're doing all kinds of interesting things in the storytelling world. So please welcome Miss Fruity.
Good evening, everybody. It's good to be here. This wonderful story that I have comes from the storyteller Virginia Hamilton. And it reminds us that the consequence of our actions are not always felt by us as much as they're felt by others. And that we need to pay attention to what the old folks say. There's no such thing as superstition. The story of little 8 John come about by a small boy lived long ago. Now he was a handsome one, but looking good never fit to the way he acted. He was meansome, just awful. He never paid attention to the older folks, and he never listened to the truth they told about. Even so, his mama loved him, but he wasn't of the same mind. His mama would tell him not to do something, and he would go straight ahead and do something awful, because that's the way he was. Awful. Contrary. 8 John, his mama said, don't go bothering those toads and frogs. Toads and frogs are bad luck. 8 John looked at his mama and said, okay, mama, I won't bury him. I won't bother him at all. But once he was out of sight of his good mama, he found him a toad and a frog. And he squished the toad and he squashed the frog. And he'd have squished up a whole bucket of frogs and toads if he could have. And don't you know, next thing that happened, his mama's cow wouldn't give no milk, and the little baby sister got bad stomach aches. Little 8 John just laughing, because he knows what's going on. Another time, his mama said, 8 John, don't sit backwards in that chair. That's not good. 8 John went straight outside and sat backwards in the first chair he could find. And don't you know, his mama's cornbread burned up with her standing there looking at it. And try as she couldn't churn no milk into butter. Everybody wondering what's going on. 8 John knew. Hey, John, his mama said, don't climb trees on Sunday, because something bad gonna happen to the family if you climb trees on Sunday. First thing Sunday morning, 8 John went out there and climbed him every tree that he could find. And don't you know, next day his papa's mule wouldn't plow and the potatoes wouldn't grow. Nobody understood, but 8 John knew, and he wasn't telling a soul. His mama said to him one time, 8 John, don't count your straight white teeth, because if you do, it's going to bring powerful sickness into this family. Lord knows that boy went to counting his teeth. He counted the uppers, he counted the lowers, he counted the front, he counted the back. He must have counted those teeth 80, 100 times. And don't you know, his mama got the whooping cough and his little baby sister got the croup, all because that 8 John, such an awful child. Oh, 8 John, his mama said, when you go to bed at night, please, please, please don't sleep with your feet to the head of the bed, because if you do, you're going to bring us the short of money blues. Well, you know 8 John, don't you? He went right in that bed, put his feet to the head, and the next thing you know, his family was stone cold broke. They didn't have a money jar, nothing under the mattress, nothing. All because of that awful little 8 John. Oh, honey, I'm going to ask you to watch out. Listen to your mama. And don't go giving yourself the Sunday morning moans. Because if you do, I'm afraid you're going to wake old warhead bloody bones. Now, little 8 John, he's such an awful contrary child. He just believed that old warhead bloody bones was something that the old folks talked about. He wasn't a believer. He wasn't a disbeliever. So he got up on Sunday morning and he moaned. He got up on the second Sunday morning and he moaned. He moaned on third Sunday, fourth Sunday, and fifth Sunday. And then it happened. In the dark, dark of the night, old warhead bloody bones rose up and came walking. And he came after little 8 John. Next morning, his mama woke up and she went into the kitchen and she looked and she said, oh, where'd that little grease spot come from? I don't remember that there last night. And she went to the stove, the sink, got a rag and started rubbing and rubbing and rubbing till she rubbed that little spot right on out. And that was the end of little 8 John. And that's what happens to all little children that don't mind what the old folks say. So close your eyes and don't make a peep. Don't say a word, just go to sleep. Don't you groan, don't you moan, or fear you a visit from old warhead bloody bone.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Well, I guess I'm not sleeping tonight. Thank you so much. That was a great story.
Thank you. Thank you.
Loved it. Okay. All right. So our next storyteller is Dave Chittenden. Hope I pronounced it right. He is representing the South Coast Storytellers. And he was trained and had a career as an engineer. And he's been telling stories for over 30 years. And the story we're going to hear tonight is a mixture of one of his nightmares and a dream he had. So take it away, Dave. Looking forward to it.
Well, thank you. I'm going to tell you about the house in my dreams. It's an unusual house. You don't see houses like this very often. It has 5 floors. And you know it has 5 floors because there's 5 rows of windows that you can see. And as you look up, the top row of windows is different. It's like little circles or squares or even stars. And I always wondered, looking at that from the outside, if that was really windows or was it just some kind of decoration that was put up there on the top. The house goes right up against the sidewalk. The sidewalk goes right up against the road, and that road is busy. Cars are zipping through that road there close together, and those drivers, they don't like each other. They're angry. They're mad. Each one wants to get ahead. I've wondered where this house might be. And thinking it over, I realized, of course, this house is in Boston. I recognize those Boston drivers. That's just the way they are. That's why I would never drive in Boston voluntarily. But the house has a couple steps. You can go up to some double doors. You go through the double doors, and the first thing you see is a stairway that goes to the second floor. Actually, I haven't ever investigated the first floor of that house. I don't know what might be on it. But you go up the stairway and you just turn to the left and go around to the front. You come to my room. Now, my room is a nice room. It's warm. It has nice furniture. It's pleasant. And I like my room a lot. But the other rooms on the second floor are strange. I can't see them very well. It's like they're out of focus. Somehow, or maybe there's fog. I don't know. I don't see them. And maybe sometimes I think maybe they're ruins or unfinished. And I've come to realize what the situation is. Those are the rooms that other people use in their dreams. And since I can't see into other people's dreams, I can't see what's going on in those rooms. Though sometimes I do see shadows on the floor moving back and forth. I've been to the third floor too. And the third floor is just like the second. It has a lot of bedrooms that are sort of unfocused and actually quite strange to look at, but you don't really see anything. I've been to the fourth floor, and that's different too. It's one big room. It has a nice wooden floor. It could be a basketball court, except that there's no hoops on the ends. Now, one time when I was at the fourth floor, I noticed that leaning up against the wall, there's one of those folding ladders. So I got that ladder out into the center of the room, just below the trap door to the fifth floor. And I walked up on the ladder and I pushed I pushed up on that trap door, but it was heavy. I couldn't move it at all. I realized maybe if I moved the ladder a little bit to a different position, I could. So I got down, moved the ladder a little bit, and I got up again. And now I pushed, and that went right up about half a foot. And I saw a pair of ankles. And as you can imagine, I let that trapdoor down and ended that dream. But the next night, the dream continued. I was going around to the back of the house now. I went around to the back, and there was some steps and a back stoop and a back door. I went in the back door, and there was a room full of things that you used to clean up, like rakes and spades and shovels and dustbins and brooms and all sorts of things that are used to clean up. But since I don't do any cleanup in my dreams, they were all new, never been used. And it was strange again, unexpected. It was a kitchen, a real kitchen there on the second floor, and had a window that you could see out in the backyard. You could see children playing in the backyard. And I've been to the third floor, and it's just like the second. Pardon me, it's just like the bedrooms. It was a bedroom that I can't see. It's sort of unfocused, as though I'm not sure that it's really there. I went out on the landing from that bedroom, and I saw something I hadn't seen before. There was a door in the wall. I pushed on that door and pushed open, and there, just about a foot or maybe 18 inches away, there was a wall which was shingled like the outside of a house. And I came to realize that this part in the back was an addition that had been added to the house, like when you have children who need a house, who need a first house, and you build on the back of your house a place for them to live. That's apparently what had been done. This house was just up against the other, but there were rungs in the wall, rungs that formed a ladder that you could use to climb. I climbed up between the walls. I could see where the fourth floor was, but there didn't seem to be any way into it. I climbed up to the fifth floor, and there was a door, like one of those eaves doors that you have in houses. I pushed it open, and there was the fifth floor. It was one big room, but it had those windows that were shaped like circles and like squares and like stars. And I had to see if those were really windows or what they were. So I ran over and looked at the windows, and they were nice. You could see out of them. They were nicely made. Then I looked back at the door that I had come through, and it was like someone was taking an eraser and erasing the lines of the door until it was gone. And it was just a blank wall. And then I thought about the last time I'd seen the fifth floor. I remembered I'd seen a pair of ankles, and I realized that they were my own ankles. Will you visit me? Will you visit me in your dreams? Will you visit me? I'm on the fifth floor.
Whoa.
I don't think I'm going to have any choice on visiting you in my nightmare tonight on the 5th floor.
Woo.
All right. Thank you, Dave. Well, we've had a really good evening of storytelling. I wrote it in the chat, but our next event is in December 16th. Many of you, well, you've all gotten at one point the whole series that we have that goes through August. So check out that series if you have it. If not, your swap leader will definitely have it. We will be emailing it out again at the end of November after the celebration's finished. And the December telling is our sacred inspirational stories. So if you have a story and your swap group wants to put you on again for that, fine. Let them know. You can tell more than one story with us. We do like to get a variety, but we also like to hear good storytellers tell again. So talk to your swap group leaders. After December, January is our tall tales. Then in February, we have romance stories. And then we just continue on with historical tales, myths, fables. And we eventually get ourselves back to personal stories, which is where we started again. And that will be in August, and we'll start that series again. So if any of those appeal to you, you can let your swap leader know and say, oh, I have a great story for February for romance stories. And you can let us know if you're, your swap leader can let us know if they nominate you as a storyteller. So I'd like to leave you with a song for a new story that I wrote. The story is a little too long to tell right now, but I've got the song, and I want to leave it with you because on Halloween night at midnight, you're going to have to be aware of this, because midnight is when they come out. And when they came out in my life as a child on Lopez Island in the San Juan Islands in Washington State, just below Vancouver Island and the Canadian border. So this is how I start the story. The hags are coming. The hags are coming. They will be here soon. The hags are coming. The hags are coming. They will be here soon. That's the start of my new story.
Oh, boy.
Okay, well, thank you so much for participating. Like I said before, we will be having celebration events in November. We have 6 pairings with different groups throughout California, Northern and Southern story swap groups. For example, the Sacramento Storytellers Guild that I belong to will be pairing with the Storytellers of San Diego, and we each have 4 tellers. We each have an MC, and we will be sharing those stories on November, I think it's 21st, but you can go to SAC and see there's at least 10 to 12 groups getting together and telling stories. And it's very exciting that the Northern groups are getting together with the Southern groups, and we're getting SAC is expanding to really involve the storytelling groups from Southern California. So if any of you know of other active groups in Southern California, please let me know, or Sarah, or anyone with SAC. about those groups so we can get information out to them so they can become more involved with SAC, and they could actually nominate someone to be a storyteller. And I just want to remind everyone the way that the nominations work. We have 6 storytellers in the genre series. So if we get 6 nominations from different swap groups, then they all get to tell. If we get more than 6 people nominations, like then we have to let 1 or 2 of those groups not be storytelling that particular month. So for example, the local group I belong into, we were able to tell in the first 2 series, and we had someone else for this one, but we took that person off the list so we could have tellers from different groups. So